In a crowded military academy hall, cadets in pressed uniforms snicker as an elderly man in civilian clothes stands quietly at the back. A top cadet approaches, mockingly asks the shabby stranger for his call sign. The old man raises his weathered face, voice barely audible. "Phoenix 1." The laughter dies instantly. At the podium, a decorated general freezes mid-speech, his glass crashing to the floor. Color drains from his face as he recognizes a ghost from his past. A man who should have died 38 years ago. Every officer in the room rises to attention, rendering a perfect salute to the confused cadet's astonishment. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing for more tales of recognition long overdue. The sound of crisp uniforms and polished shoes filled the grand auditorium of Holloway Air Force Academy. Afternoon light streamed through tall windows, creating golden bars across the assembled cadets and officers preparing for the annual Wings of Honor ceremony. Cadet Rourke Fleming adjusted his dress uniform in a hallway mirror, straightening the already perfect alignment of his insignia. The mirror reflected back everything a top military cadet should be: strong jaw, clear eyes, confident posture, fourth-generation military excellence. Another day, another chance for Fleming to collect more honors, Cadet Zephyr Tanner said, nudging their fellow squadron member, Bryce Dorian. "Just maintaining the family legacy," Rourke replied with practiced humility that didn't quite hide his pride. He ran a hand through his regulation-cut hair and turned to his friends. Grandfather would expect nothing less. The hallway suddenly quieted as Commandant General Thaddeus Westlake strode past, shoulders rigid beneath his star-laden uniform. The cadets snapped to attention, but Westlake barely acknowledged them, unusual for an officer known for his meticulous attention to protocol and decorum. "What's with Westlake?" Bryce whispered once the general was safely past. "Looks like he's seen a ghost." "Probably the secretary coming down from Washington," Zephyr suggested. "I heard there's some special guests for the ceremony today." Rourke nodded toward a cluster of senior instructors huddled in conversation nearby. "Whatever it is, it's got the brass on edge. Colonel Hargrove hasn't stopped checking his watch for the past hour." Meanwhile, across the academy grounds, an elderly man named Harrison Caldwell walked slowly toward the main building. His unremarkable civilian clothes, a simple button-down shirt and slacks, stood in sharp contrast to the military precision surrounding him. A slight limp marked his gait, the result of an old injury that had never properly healed. A security guard at the checkpoint held up his hand as Harrison approached. "Sir, this is a restricted event. I need to see your credentials." Harrison didn't speak, just reached into his jacket pocket and produced a worn envelope with official military seals. The guard's expression shifted from dismissive to confused as he examined the contents. "This is unusual," the guard said. "Let me verify this, sir." He stepped away to make a radio call, keeping one eye on the old man. Harrison waited patiently, his weathered face revealing nothing. After a tense radio exchange, the guard reluctantly waved him through, still looking puzzled. "Building straight ahead, sir," he said, unable to hide his curiosity. "The ceremony's in the main auditorium." Harrison nodded once and continued his slow walk. He passed through the perfectly maintained grounds, taking in the carefully preserved aircraft displays and the towering flagpole with its rippling stars and stripes. When he reached a stone memorial wall near the entrance, he paused. His fingers traced over a blank section of polished granite, a space where names should have been, but weren't. A groundskeeper raking nearby watched with interest. Why would anyone stop at the empty section of the memorial? The wall contained the names of Academy graduates lost in service, organized by conflict and mission. But that particular section had always been blank, just smooth, polished stone. Inside the auditorium, dignitaries and decorated officers filled the front rows. Perfect posture, perfect uniforms, perfect pedigrees. Sunlight glinted off medals and insignia as the room hummed with conversation. Cadets filed in with practiced precision, finding their assigned seats with military efficiency. General Westlake stood at the podium, shuffling papers with uncharacteristic nervousness. His aide whispered something in his ear, causing him to glance sharply toward the entrance. Harrison slipped in through a side door, finding a place to stand against the back wall. He made no attempt to draw attention, but his civilian clothes stood out starkly among the sea of uniforms. He settled his weight carefully, favoring his good leg. The ceremony began with the usual formalities: presentation of colors, national anthem, welcoming remarks. General Westlake stepped to the podium, his voice unusually strained as he began. "Today we honor the legacy of those who serve with distinction," he said, eyes scanning the crowd. "The traditions we uphold and the sacrifices made by those who came before us." In the middle rows, Rourke noticed the shabby old man at the back of the hall. He nudged Zephyr, nodding subtly in Harrison's direction. "Check out Grandpa," he whispered. "Wrong day for the museum tour." Zephyr smirked. "Maybe he's lost. Should we help him find the bingo hall?" When Harrison shifted positions, wincing slightly from his leg pain, Rourke added, just loudly enough to be heard by nearby cadets. "Lost Grandpa wandered in from bingo night." Several cadets snickered, but a senior officer sitting nearby shot them a warning glance. Rourke straightened, properly chastised, but continued watching the old man with barely disguised amusement. As General Westlake introduced the special guests, decorated veterans of celebrated missions, Rourke's attention kept drifting back to the civilian. Something about the old man's calm dignity seemed out of place, yet oddly commanding. During a pause between speakers, as the Academy band prepared for the next segment, Rourke made a decision. Rising from his seat, he approached Harrison with a helpful smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sir," he said, in the respectful tone cadets were taught to use with civilians, "the public viewing section is in the overflow room. This ceremony is for military personnel and official guests. Would you like me to show you the way?" Harrison simply reached into his pocket and produced his invitation without a word. Rourke glanced at it, embarrassment flickering across his face. But rather than retreating, he doubled down. "Are you a veteran, sir?" he asked, trying to recover his composure. Harrison nodded once. "What squadron were you with?" Rourke pressed, his voice carrying more than he intended, in the momentary quiet as the band finished arranging their music. No response. "What was your call sign, sir?" Rourke added, unable to keep a hint of skepticism from his tone. Harrison hesitated, his eyes growing distant, as if seeing something far beyond the auditorium walls. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. "Phoenix 1. In that moment, the auditorium had fallen completely silent between speakers. The microphone on the podium picked up Harrison's words, amplifying them through the hall. General Westlake, who had been preparing to introduce the next segment, froze mid-movement. The water glass in his hand slipped from suddenly trembling fingers, shattering on the stage with a crash that echoed through the silence. Rourke's smirk faded as he turned to look at his friends, but stopped when he saw their expressions. Everyone was staring past him at General Westlake, who stood gripping the podium with white knuckles, his face drained of all color. This ceremony is temporarily suspended," Westlake managed, his voice shaking. Whispers erupted throughout the hall as the general descended from the stage with unsteady steps. Rourke stood rooted in place as Westlake approached. The general walked past him as if he didn't exist, stopping 3 paces from Harrison. Drawing himself up to full height, Westlake rendered a perfect formal salute. "Sir," he said, voice barely audible, "we were told you were dead." The whispers in the auditorium intensified. Rourke glanced around in confusion, seeing senior officers rising to their feet, faces showing shock or disbelief. Who was this shabby old man that commanded such respect from the decorated general? "At ease, Thaddeus," Harrison said quietly, returning the salute with visible reluctance. "I never expected to step foot in this place again." Westlake lowered his hand slowly, as if uncertain what to do next. "Sir, we should speak privately." "No doubt Washington is already calling," Harrison replied, a hint of bitterness in his tone. "This way, please." Westlake gestured toward a side door, then turned to his aide. "Lieutenant, inform our guests there will be a brief delay. Cadets are dismissed until further notice." As Harrison followed Westlake from the room, he passed Rourke, who stood frozen in embarrassment and confusion. The old man paused briefly. "Be careful with assumptions, son," he said softly. "They're usually wrong." The auditorium erupted into conversation the moment the door closed behind them. "What just happened?" Zephyr asked, joining Rourke. "Who is that guy?" "Phoenix 1, Bryce added. "Never heard that call sign before." "Me neither," Rourke admitted, watching as senior officers huddled in urgent discussion. "But Whatever it means, it sure got everyone's attention. 3 hours later, as evening fell across the academy grounds, Rourke sat in the archives section of the academy library. Computer terminals surrounded him, each displaying variations of the same message. Access denied. He'd tried every search term he could think of. Phoenix Squadron, Phoenix 1, Caldwell Pilot, 1983 Special Operations. Nothing yielded results in the military database he could access with his cadet credentials. Cadet Fleming, a crisp voice came from behind him. The archives close in 10 minutes. Rourke turned to find Archivist Lieutenant Freya Larson standing in the doorway, her expression severe. Everything about her was precise, from her perfectly arranged uniform to her coolly professional demeanor. "Lieutenant," he acknowledged, quickly closing the search windows. "I was just doing some research." "I can see that," she said, approaching his terminal. "Searching for classified material beyond your clearance level is a violation of Academy protocols." Rourke's face flushed. "I'm trying to understand what happened today. Who is Harrison Caldwell? What's Phoenix Squadron?" Freya's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "What happened today is you embarrassed yourself and this academy by disrespecting a visitor." "But who is he? Everyone acted like he's someone important, but I've never heard of him in any of our military history courses." Freya hesitated, something flickering behind her professional mask. "Phoenix 1 is a call sign from Ghost Stories, Cadet Fleming, not real operational history." "Then why did Commandant Westlake nearly collapse when he heard it?" Her eyes narrowed. "You're overstepping, Cadet. Some ghosts shouldn't be disturbed. I suggest you focus on your training and leave the past where it belongs." She turned to go, then added over her shoulder, "The archives are now closed. Good evening, Cadet Fleming." Rourke gathered his things slowly, frustration building. As he reached the door, he glanced back and saw Freya at her desk, making a phone call. Her voice was too low to make out the words, but her expression was tense. "Sir, someone's asking questions about Phoenix," she said, not realizing Rourke could still see her. "Yes, sir. I'll handle it." In his office across the campus, General Westlake sat alone in the darkness, a single desk lamp illuminating an old photograph. He held a tumbler of bourbon, the bottle nearby already half empty. Young faces stared back from the photo. 7 pilots in front of an aircraft whose shape seemed oddly unfamiliar. The image was faded, its edges worn from handling. Westlake's finger traced over one face in particular, a younger Harrison Caldwell, standing tall and confident in his flight suit. A knock at the door made him hastily return the photo to a locked drawer. "Enter." His aide, Lieutenant Mercer, stepped in with a secure tablet. "Sir, there's a priority message from the secretary." "Of course there is," Westlake muttered. "They want to know how Caldwell appeared after all these years, and what actions you're taking to contain the situation." Westlake's jaw tightened. "Contain? Is that the word they used?" "Yes, sir." Mercer shifted uncomfortably. "What should I tell Washington?" "Nothing. Not until I speak with him myself." Westlake turned to the window, his reflection ghostly in the darkness beyond. "Tell them I'm handling it personally." As Mercer left, Westlake closed his eyes, a memory flashing unbidden. Flames surrounding him, smoke filling his lungs, the searing heat of a burning cockpit. Then strong hands pulling him free, dragging him across ice and snow as sirens wailed in the distance. His phone buzzed, bringing him back to the present. An unknown number. The message read, "Keep the past buried, General. Some secrets should stay dead." Westlake dropped the phone as if it had burned him. His hands trembled as he poured another drink. The next morning, Harrison Caldwell sat on the edge of the bed in the Academy guest quarters, examining his surroundings. The room was comfortable but impersonal, standard VIP accommodations for visiting dignitaries. His gaze fixed on the small camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling. He'd slept poorly, his old injuries making the unfamiliar bed uncomfortable. Decades of radiation damage had taken their toll, though few who saw him would understand the true source of his ailments. Just another elderly man with the aches and pains of age. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. When he opened it, Rourke Fleming stood in the hallway, looking decidedly less confident than the day before. "Mr. Caldwell," the cadet said stiffly, "I wanted to apologize for yesterday. My behavior was unacceptable." Harrison studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in, Cadet." Inside, Rourke stood at parade rest, clearly uncomfortable. Sir, I had no idea who you were. And who am I? Harrison asked mildly, lowering himself into a chair. The question caught Rourke off guard. I don't know, sir. That's the problem. I've searched every record I can access, but there's nothing about Phoenix Squadron or Phoenix 1 in any of our databases. And that bothers you? It wasn't a question. Yes, sir. We're taught to know our history, the great pilots, the pivotal missions. Rourke hesitated. My family has served for generations. 3 generations of Flemings have their names on Academy trophies. I can't be the one who fails, who misses something important. Harrison's expression softened slightly. The problem with legends, son, is they're usually manufactured, carefully crafted to inspire without revealing uncomfortable truths. He reached for a glass of water on the side table. As he did, his sleeve pulled back, revealing severe burn scars that twisted up his forearm. Old injuries that had healed poorly. Rourke noticed, but pretended not to, though his curiosity was clearly piqued. Harrison changed the subject. Tell me about Westlake as a commander. General Westlake? Rourke straightened. Best officer in the Air Force, sir. His leadership during joint NATO exercises is legendary. His emergency protocols are taught in every military academy in the Alliance. Is that what they teach now? Harrison's expression darkened. Sir, nothing. Harrison rose slowly. I'd like to see how cadets train these days. Would you show me to the simulator facility? The request surprised Rourke. Of course, sir. Right this way. As they walked across the campus, heads turned to watch them pass. Word had spread about the mysterious visitor who had halted the ceremony. Cadets whispered behind their hands. Instructors gave respectful nods. Harrison acknowledged none of it, his attention seemingly focused on the academy itself, the buildings, the aircraft on display, the training facilities. Has it changed much? Rourke asked. Everything changes, Harrison replied, and nothing does. At the simulator facility, a class was in progress. Cadets practiced emergency procedures in sophisticated flight simulators that replicated the cockpits of the latest fighter aircraft. Instructors monitored their performance, calling out scenarios and complications. Harrison watched with interest, occasionally nodding at a particularly good maneuver or frowning at a mistake. His knowledge was clearly extensive, though he offered no commentary. After 20 minutes, General Westlake appeared in the doorway. His expression was carefully controlled, but tension radiated from him. Cadets dismissed, he announced. Continue your exercises tomorrow. The students quickly gathered their things and filed out, casting curious glances at Harrison as they left. Rourke hesitated, unsure if he should leave as well. You too, Cadet Fleming, Westlake said firmly. Actually, Harrison interjected, I'd prefer if he stayed. The 2 men locked eyes in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Westlake nodded stiffly. Very well. Cadet, wait outside. We'll call if you're needed. Once alone, the tension in the room thickened. Harrison moved to one of the simulators, running his hand over the controls with familiarity, despite the advanced technology that hadn't existed during his service. 38 years, Harrison, Westlake said quietly. Why now? I saw your name announced for Joint Chiefs nomination, Harrison replied without looking up. Quite an achievement. Westlake's jaw tightened. I earned that position. Did Lowell? Harrison turned to face him. Did Nakamura? Did Alvarez? They're dead. We both know that. Are they? Harrison's voice was dangerously soft. Or did you leave them behind too? Color drained from Westlake's face. You have no right to come here and disrupt everything I've built. The past is past. Is it? Harrison moved closer. Tell me, General, do your cadets know the real origin of those NATO protocols they study? Do they know what blood purchased their security? Before Westlake could respond, a security officer appeared at the door. General, sir, there's a situation. Mr. Caldwell has an unauthorized visitor at the gate. I gave explicit orders, Westlake snapped. No visitors without my direct approval. The officer shifted uncomfortably. Sir, it's Senator Caldwell from the Armed Services Committee. She's demanding to see both you and Mr. Caldwell immediately. Westlake's expression froze. Senator Caldwell? Harrison's smile held no warmth. My daughter, Thaddeus, she's been quite interested in military history lately, particularly the parts that were erased. Outside the facility, Rourke waited as instructed, his mind racing with questions. Whatever was happening between General Westlake and Harrison, Caldwell went far beyond a simple reunion of old comrades. There was history here, painful history that someone had gone to great lengths to bury. He watched as a sleek government vehicle pulled up, and a woman emerged, tall, poised, her bearing unmistakably similar to Harrison's, despite her professional attire. Senator Imogen Caldwell had her father's eyes and the same quiet intensity. Security officers escorted her toward the building, her expression determined. As she passed Rourke, their eyes met briefly. There was recognition there, though they'd never met, as if she could tell he was somehow part of whatever was unfolding. "Cadet," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "Senator," he replied, coming to attention automatically. Inside Westlake's office 10 minutes later, the confrontation continued. Senator Imogen Caldwell stood by the window, her posture rigid with controlled anger. Harrison sat quietly in a corner chair, watching. General Westlake remained behind his desk, a symbolic barrier. "General Westlake," Imogen began coolly, "we finally meet in person. Senator, this is hardly the appropriate venue. I've requested an official meeting with you 17 times in the past 3 years, all denied." She placed her briefcase on his desk and opened it, producing a classified file labeled Broken Arrow 1983. "I've been investigating for years after my father's supposed training accident." Westlake glanced at Harrison. "Your father saved my life, Senator. I've never denied that. But you denied everything else," Harrison said quietly. A knock at the door interrupted them. Lieutenant Freya Larson entered, carrying sealed archive boxes. She hesitated when she saw the assembled group. "The records you requested, sir," she said, placing them on the desk. Westlake nodded tersely. "Thank you, Lieutenant. You're dismissed." Freya didn't move. "With respect, sir, I can't do that. I took an oath to truth, not convenience." "Lieutenant, this is a direct order." "My grandfather was Air Force Intelligence 1983, Freya continued, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. "Before he died, he told me to watch for Phoenix Squadron files. Said someday, someone might come looking for the truth." Senator Caldwell opened the classified file, spreading photos across Westlake's desk. Surveillance images of an experimental aircraft with Phoenix Squadron markings, mission briefs, medical reports. "This mission officially never happened," she said. "And yet we have 7 pilots who disappeared from records afterward, 5 death certificates with sealed caskets, and 2 survivors who were forced into silence." She slid forward a final document, a presidential directive ordering the complete expungement of Operation Broken Arrow from all official records. "The question is, General Westlake," Harrison said quietly, "who are you more afraid of? Washington discovering you've been lying for decades, or the world learning what really happened over Siberia in 1983? Westlake lunged for his secure phone, but Freya was faster, unplugging it from the wall. "I think," she said firmly, "we all deserve the truth, sir." Outside the office, Rourke Fleming stood at attention where he'd been instructed to wait. Through the door, he could hear raised voices, though the words were indistinct. Something momentous was happening, something that would change everything he thought he knew about military history and the academy he'd worked so hard to excel in. What could have happened in 1983 that would cause such secrecy? Who was Harrison Caldwell really, and why did his very presence shake the foundations of command? Whatever Phoenix 1 meant, it clearly carried weight that transcended normal military protocol. As the sun set over Holloway Air Force Academy, casting long shadows across the grounds where generations of pilots had trained, Rourke realized something fundamental was shifting. The carefully maintained narrative of military history was cracking open, revealing darker truths beneath. And somehow, he had become part of it. If you've ever encountered someone whose quiet dignity challenged your assumptions, someone who never sought recognition but deserved it more than anyone, share your story in the comments. True respect is earned through actions, not appearances. Senator Caldwell spread the contents of the classified file across General Westlake's desk. Surveillance photos, mission briefs, and medical reports bearing the codename Broken Arrow 1983. The images showed an experimental aircraft unlike anything in the public record, sleek, angular stealth technology that appeared decades ahead of its time. "This mission officially never happened," she said, And yet we have 7 pilots who disappeared from records afterward. Harrison sat quietly in the corner, watching his daughter take control of the confrontation he'd spent decades avoiding. He'd never wanted this, the exposure, the questions, the inevitable reckoning. But Imogen had her mother's determination. Once she started digging, nothing could stop her. "I want to know why my father's service was erased," Imogen continued, her voice steady despite the emotion beneath. "Why 7 decorated pilots vanished from history." Westlake's eyes never left the photographs. His fingers trembled slightly as he touched one, showing a group of pilots standing before the experimental aircraft, their faces young and determined. 7 pilots. 7 ghosts. "These documents are highly classified," he said finally. "Possessing them is a federal offense, Senator." "Is that really the position you want to take?" Imogen asked coldly. "Threatening a member of the Armed Services Committee instead of explaining why the government buried the existence of heroes." Lieutenant Freya Larson stepped forward. "My grandfather kept unofficial records," she said. "He was Air Force intelligence in '83. Said someday someone might need to know what really happened." "Your grandfather should have respected his security clearance," Westlake snapped. "Like you did?" Harrison spoke finally. "Tell me, Thaddeus, how many stars did your silence buy?" The room fell quiet. Even Imogen seemed taken aback by the bitterness in her father's voice. After a long moment, Westlake sighed heavily. "What do you want?" "The truth," Harrison said simply. "Before I die, before all of us die. You know I don't have the authority to declassify this operation." "But I do," Imogen countered. "As committee chair, I can initiate hearings on historical military operations, unless you'd prefer to handle this privately." Westlake's jaw tightened. "You have no idea what you're meddling with, Senator. Some secrets stay buried for good reasons." "Like radiation poisoning?" Harrison asked quietly. Westlake's head snapped up, eyes wide with shock. "What did you say?" "You heard me. Stage 4. Doctors gave me 6 months. That was 3 months ago." "My God," Westlake whispered. "I didn't know." "Of course not. The mission didn't exist, remember? So, how could its consequences?" Before Westlake could respond, the door opened and Rourke Fleming entered, still at rigid attention despite his obvious uncertainty. "Sir, I apologize for the interruption, but there's a situation outside. Media vans are at the gate. Someone leaked information about yesterday's ceremony." Westlake swore under his breath. "Containment just became impossible." "It was always impossible," Harrison said, rising slowly from his chair. "Truth has patience, Thaddeus, even when we don't." The sun had set over Holloway Air Force Academy, leaving the memorial wall illuminated by subtle ground lighting. Harrison stood before it, one hand resting on the smooth, empty section of stone that had caught his attention the day before. Rourke Fleming stood beside him, confusion evident in his posture. "7 names should be here," Harrison said quietly. "Phoenix Squadron." "I don't understand, sir. If your squadron performed some important mission, why wouldn't it be recorded?" Harrison's weathered face reflected in the polished granite. "In 1983, we were closer to nuclear war than even during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Most people never knew. Even now, the full truth hasn't been declassified." "Was it the Soviet Union?" "During NATO's Able Archer exercises, an early warning system malfunction on the Soviet side indicated incoming American missiles. Their launch facilities went on high alert, preparing a counterstrike." Rourke frowned. "But that would have been detected by our intelligence." "It was, but official channels refused to act. Too risky during heightened tensions. Too politically complicated. The diplomatic back channel would have taken hours we didn't have." Harrison turned to face Rourke directly. "Your precious General Westlake was my navigator. We flew an experimental stealth aircraft with technology that wasn't supposed to exist yet. We crossed into Soviet airspace to deliver verification that no attack was underway and to intercept any unauthorized launches." "Without orders?" Rourke asked, stunned. "Against orders. Phoenix Squadron went dark. Unofficial mission. We prevented nuclear launch by minutes, not hours." "But that's incredible. You saved millions of lives. You should be heroes." Harrison's bitter laugh held no humor. "When we returned, they gave us a choice: total silence or treason charges. We were a liability, a reminder of how close we came, how unprepared the system was." Understanding dawned on Rourke's face. General Westlake built his career on NATO readiness protocols, protocols that didn't exist until after our mission, protocols written because we proved how broken the system was. Harrison's fingers traced over the blank wall again. The military learned from our mission, implemented new safeguards, created new response plans, but they couldn't acknowledge the catastrophic failure that made them necessary. So they erased you. Easier to build legends on clean foundations than to explain why 7 pilots had to go rogue to prevent Armageddon. Harrison turned away from the wall. Westlake was the junior officer, the only one without family, the perfect candidate to carry the new protocols forward while keeping the old secrets. While the rest of you disappeared, Rourke said softly. Correct. Retirement, reassignment, medical discharge. Whatever it took to scatter us and ensure our silence. They walked slowly along the path back toward the main campus, the academy buildings glowing against the night sky. In the distance, media vans clustered at the main gate, lights and cameras visible even from afar. What will happen now? Rourke asked. Truth, Harrison said simply. And consequences. In the simulator facility later that night, Harrison demonstrated old flight maneuvers to a fascinated Rourke. Despite advances in technology, the fundamental principles remained the same. Harrison's hands moved over the controls with muscle memory intact, even after decades away from the cockpit. The Cobra maneuver, Harrison explained, executing a perfect deceleration that would have caused a pursuing aircraft to overshoot. Saved my life twice over Siberia. They still teach it, Rourke said, watching intently. But I've never seen it executed quite like that. Modern aircraft have different capabilities. We had to work with what we had. As Harrison began another demonstration, the door opened and General Westlake entered. His uniform was impeccable as always, but his face showed the strain of the past 24 hours. Fleming, he acknowledged stiffly. Mr. Caldwell. General, Rourke responded, coming to attention automatically. Harrison merely nodded, continuing the simulation. On the screen, his virtual aircraft executed a complex series of evasive maneuvers through a mountain range. That's the Ural approach, Westlake said quietly. I remember it. You should. You plotted it. Harrison didn't look away from the screen. Westlake turned to Rourke. Cadet, give us the room. The cadet stays, Harrison countered, finally turning to face Westlake. He deserves to hear this. All your cadets do. The real history behind the protocols you've been teaching them. The tension between the two men crackled like static electricity. Rourke remained perfectly still, caught in the crossfire of decades-old wounds. I followed orders, Westlake said finally. The same orders you chose to disobey. And which choice was right? If we'd followed protocol, we wouldn't be having this conversation. There wouldn't be an academy. There wouldn't be anything left. You don't know that for certain. Don't I? The intelligence was clear. The Soviets had 4 minutes to make a decision. We gave them confirmation that no American strike was incoming. 4 minutes, Thaddeus. Harrison turned back to the simulator, but his movements had become less precise, slightly erratic. His breathing changed, becoming labored. Suddenly he gasped, clutching his chest, and collapsed to the floor. Harrison! Westlake rushed forward, all military formality forgotten. Get a medic! Rourke shouted, dropping to his knees beside Harrison. Code Blue, simulator facility. Westlake barked into his radio. Medical emergency. Within minutes, Academy medical staff arrived, transferring Harrison onto a gurney. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor, his breathing shallow and irregular. BP's dropping, one medic reported, pulse weak and thready. Get him to the medical bay immediately, the chief medical officer ordered. Full cardiac workup. As they rushed Harrison from the room, Westlake and Rourke followed. The general's face had lost its rigid control, revealing genuine fear. In the Academy's advanced medical facility, doctors worked frantically to stabilize Harrison. Monitors beeped, medical terminology flew back and forth, and Westlake paced the hallway outside like a caged animal. Sir, Rourke said hesitantly, should we notify Senator Caldwell? Westlake nodded. My aide is contacting her now. Hours passed. Finally, the chief medical officer emerged, his expression grave. He's stabilized for now, he reported, but his condition is serious. It's not just his heart. There are multiple system failures consistent with long-term radiation exposure. Radiation? Westlake's voice cracked. Yes, sir. Advanced stage. The pattern suggests exposure decades ago, with progressive deterioration. I'm surprised he's still functioning at all. Westlake sank into a chair, face ashen. My God. You didn't know? Rourke asked. We were all exposed during the mission, Westlake said quietly. The experimental aircraft's shielding failed, but the levels were deemed survivable. Survivable with proper medical monitoring and treatment, the doctor corrected. Has Mr. Caldwell received any specialized care for radiation exposure? He couldn't, Westlake admitted. The mission never officially happened. There would have been no way to explain the exposure without revealing classified information. The doctor's expression hardened. So, he's been suffering the effects untreated for 40 years, while you received classified medical monitoring? Westlake couldn't meet his eyes. Can I see him? Rourke asked. Briefly, he's conscious but weak. In the hospital room, Harrison lay connected to multiple monitors, an oxygen mask covering half his face. Despite his condition, his eyes were alert, following Rourke as he entered. Cadet, he acknowledged, voice muffled by the mask. Sir? Rourke stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed. The doctors say you're going to be okay. Harrison's eyes crinkled slightly. Doctors lie too, son, but I appreciate the sentiment. The door opened again, and Senator Imogen Caldwell burst in, her professional composure cracking at the sight of her father. Dad, she whispered, rushing to his side. Harrison reached for her hand. I'm all right, Emmy. You're not all right. You're dying. She turned to glare at Westlake, who had followed her in. He's been dying for decades while you've been collecting stars and accolades. Senator, Westlake began. Don't, she cut him off. Just don't. I've spent years trying to understand why my father would never talk about his service, why his health kept deteriorating without explanation, why he refused to even visit a VA hospital. She turned back to Harrison. And all this time, you've been protecting them, the same people who erased your sacrifice. I signed the same papers he did, Harrison said quietly. We all did. Under duress, threatened with treason charges for saving millions of lives. It was complicated, Imogen. The mission wasn't sanctioned. We stole experimental aircraft, violated Soviet airspace during the height of the Cold War. To prevent nuclear war, which no one could acknowledge, almost happened. Harrison's voice weakened. The truth would have caused panic, diplomatic disaster. The very conflict we prevented might have happened anyway if the full story had come out. Imogen shook her head, tears threatening. So, instead, they buried the heroes and promoted the convenient witnesses. Westlake flinched as if struck. I thought I was the only survivor, he said. They told me everyone else died in the crash. What crash? Rourke asked. The cover story, Harrison explained. An experimental aircraft malfunction over the Arctic. Classified testing mission. All hands lost except one lucky survivor. He looked at Westlake. The perfect foundation for a promising career. The officer who learned from tragedy and developed new safety protocols. I believed it, Westlake insisted. For years, I believed you were all dead. When did you learn the truth? Imogen demanded. 1991, after the Soviet Union collapsed. I found records during a joint intelligence exchange. By then, he trailed off. By then your star was already rising, Harrison finished for him. Too late to tell the truth without destroying your own career. The monitors beeped steadily in the silence that followed. Outside the window, dawn was breaking over the academy grounds. I want everyone to know, Harrison said finally. All of it, before it's too late. Dad, your health is already forfeit, has been for decades. He looked at Westlake. You owe us this, Thaddeus. All of us, the living and the dead. Westlake stood straighter, decision visibly forming. The ceremony. We'll reconvene it. Today. Sir, Rourke interjected, the media's already here. This will go national within hours. Good, Harrison said. Some truth should be shouted. As morning light filtered through the hospital window, Rourke found himself volunteering to help Harrison prepare. The old pilot insisted on wearing his original dress uniform rather than hospital garments, though it hung loosely on his diminished frame. Never thought I'd wear this again, Harrison commented as Rourke helped him with the jacket buttons. Kept it mothballed for 40 years. Just couldn't bring myself to throw it away. It's an honor to help, sir, Rourke said sincerely. Harrison studied him for a moment. You remind me of my navigator on that mission, not Westlake, Lieutenant Rivera. Same earnestness, same belief that the system works. Doesn't it? Eventually? Sometimes it needs a push. Harrison nodded toward the window, where activity could be seen in the quadrangle. Looks like they're setting up. Outside, the Academy staff had worked frantically to reorganize the interrupted ceremony. Media had been allowed limited access, cameras positioned at the back of the assembly. Cadets and officers filed in with a mixture of confusion and anticipation. Something historic was happening, though most still didn't understand what. Harrison insisted on walking to the ceremony rather than using a wheelchair. Rourke and Imogen flanked him, ready to provide support if needed. But he moved with determined dignity despite his obvious weakness. As they approached, a hush fell over the assembled crowd. Westlake, standing at the podium, watched their approach with an unreadable expression. He had removed most of his decorations, wearing only his rank insignia and nameplate. Harrison took his place on the stage, standing straight despite the pain evident in his eyes. Rourke moved to join the other cadets, but Harrison gestured for him to remain nearby. Westlake stepped to the microphone. The cameras rolled. History held its breath. Yesterday, he began, this ceremony was interrupted by the appearance of a man many of us believed long dead. A man whose existence was deliberately erased from our records and our history. Today, I stand before you to correct a grave injustice that has persisted for nearly 4 decades. He turned to face Harrison directly. This man is Captain Harrison Caldwell, callsign Phoenix 1, commander of an elite squadron that executed the most important mission in modern history, a mission that saved countless lives, perhaps civilization itself, a mission that, until today, officially never happened. Murmurs spread through the assembly as Westlake continued, detailing the events of 1983, the Soviet early warning system malfunction, the imminent threat of nuclear launch based on false information, and the unauthorized mission that 7 pilots undertook to prevent catastrophe. These 7 pilots violated direct orders, Westlake acknowledged. They commandeered experimental aircraft. They penetrated Soviet airspace during the height of Cold War tensions. They did this knowing they faced court-martial or worse upon return. They did it because it was necessary. He removed his remaining medals, placing them on the podium. Every honor I've received began with a lie of omission. The protocols and procedures that built my career were written in the blood and sacrifice of Phoenix Squadron, procedures created because these 7 pilots proved how catastrophically unprepared our systems were. As Westlake spoke, Harrison's gaze swept over the assembled cadets. Most looked shocked, some confused, others inspired. Rourke watched with a mixture of awe and growing understanding. When Phoenix Squadron returned, Westlake continued, they were given a choice: total silence or treason charges. Their mission was buried. Their aircraft officially never existed. 5 were listed as killed in a classified training accident. 2 survivors were sworn to secrecy and scattered to ensure their silence. He looked directly at Harrison. I was the junior officer, the convenient witness, young enough to carry forward the lessons learned without questioning the narrative. I built my career on their sacrifice while they suffered in silence. The silence in the auditorium was absolute now. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. What I didn't know, Westlake's voice cracked slightly, was that all members of Phoenix Squadron were exposed to dangerous levels of radiation during their mission. The experimental aircraft's shielding failed. While I received classified medical monitoring as part of my continued service, the others were denied treatment. They couldn't seek specialized care without revealing classified information. He stepped away from the podium, walking to stand before Harrison. Captain Caldwell has been dying for 40 years from injuries received serving his country, injuries that could have been treated if we had acknowledged the truth. Without warning, Westlake dropped to one knee before Harrison. Phoenix 1, permission to rejoin your squadron, sir. The gesture sent shockwaves through the assembly, a 4-star general kneeling before a captain. Military protocol shattered like glass. Harrison, visibly moved, placed a hand on Westlake's shoulder. Permission granted, Phoenix 7. As if on cue, the entire assembly rose to attention. A spontaneous salute rippled through the ranks, from senior officers to the youngest cadets. Rourke found himself blinking back tears as he rendered his own salute, finally understanding what real courage looked like. Not the courage to follow orders, the courage to know when not to. The ceremony continued with the formal recognition of Phoenix Squadron, their names finally spoken aloud in the place where they should have been honored decades earlier. Harrison accepted the acknowledgement with quiet dignity, though his strength was clearly fading. As the assembly dispersed, media swarmed forward, cameras flashing, questions flying. Senator Caldwell stepped in, providing a shield of officialdom. "My father will provide a full statement once his health permits," she informed them. "The Armed Services Committee will be conducting a comprehensive review of this operation and its aftermath." Harrison was escorted back to the medical facility, leaning heavily on Rourke's arm. Once away from the cameras, his facade of strength crumbled, and he nearly collapsed. "Easy, sir," Rourke said, supporting his weight. "We've got you." "Worth it," Harrison whispered. "All of it. Worth it to see the truth acknowledged." In the hospital room, doctors immediately reconnected monitoring equipment, concerned by Harrison's deteriorating vitals. "That was reckless," the chief medical officer admonished. "Your condition is serious." "My condition has been terminal for months, doctor," Harrison replied. This was more important. Later that evening, as Harrison rested, Rourke sat with Imogen in the hospital waiting room. The senator looked exhausted, but determined. "What happens now?" Rourke asked. "Justice, hopefully, recognition for the surviving members of Phoenix Squadron, proper acknowledgement for those who've already passed." She rubbed her eyes. "My father has been carrying this burden alone for so long." "Not anymore," Rourke promised. "The Academy won't forget again." A week later, Harrison's condition had stabilized enough for limited movement. Rourke visited regularly, often finding him working with Senator Caldwell on documentation for the congressional inquiry. One afternoon, Rourke arrived with news. "Sir, we found Nakamura. She's alive in Seattle." Harrison looked up, disbelief warring with hope on his face. "Maya, she's alive?" "Yes, sir. And Alvarez is in a VA hospital in San Antonio. Their symptoms match yours, radiation poisoning, progressing more slowly." Harrison's hand trembled as he set down his papers. "After all these years," he whispered, "I thought they were all gone. We're arranging transport. They want to see you." "Nakamura," Harrison smiled weakly. "She always was too stubborn to die." Imogen entered with her own update. "The committee has voted to declassify the Broken Arrow files, full public disclosure, and expedited medical benefits for all Phoenix Squadron survivors." Harrison nodded. "Medals don't matter anymore, just the truth, just finding my people." The next day, an unexpected visitor arrived, General Westlake, out of uniform for the first time in Rourke's memory, wearing civilian clothes. "My resignation has been accepted," he announced without preamble, "effective immediately." "That wasn't necessary," Harrison said. "Yes, it was." Westlake sat heavily in the visitor's chair. "I should have done this years ago, when I first learned the truth." "You were caught in the same web we all were," Harrison said, surprising Rourke with his generosity. "The difference is, you had more to lose by speaking up, and more to gain by staying silent." Westlake leaned forward. "I have a request. One last mission." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "The Air Force Museum has the last remaining XF-1115N prototype, the Phoenix aircraft. I've arranged for its flight systems to be temporarily reactivated." "You want to fly it?" Harrison asked incredulously. "I want you to see your squadron fly one last time, a missing man formation over the Academy." Harrison's eyes glistened. "My flying days are long past, Thaddeus." "Not for them." Westlake handed him a tablet showing 3 faces, older versions of the pilots in the old photograph. Nakamura, Alvarez, Lowell, all certified on modern simulators, all willing to fly one more mission with their commander watching. "When?" Harrison's voice was barely audible. "Tomorrow, if you're strong enough." The next day dawned clear and cold, perfect flying weather. A medical transport brought Harrison to the Academy airfield in a wheelchair, but he insisted on standing for the ceremony, supported by Rourke on one side and Imogen on the other. The Academy had turned out in full, every cadet and officer standing at attention as Harrison was escorted to a viewing platform. Westlake waited there, along with the Academy's senior staff and a contingent of government officials who looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Captain Caldwell," Westlake said formally, "Phoenix Squadron reports for duty." On the tarmac, 4 gleaming F-35s waited, their engines beginning to spool up. Modern aircraft, but painted with the distinctive markings of Phoenix Squadron, rising from flames. Harrison stood straighter, a glimpse of the commander he had once been visible through the ravages of time and illness. "Let's fly." The jets taxied into position, then roared down the runway one by one, climbing into the crystal blue sky. As they formed up in perfect diamond formation, their radio communications played through speakers on the viewing platform. "Phoenix 2 standing by." A woman's voice, aged but strong, Nakamura. "Phoenix 3 standing by." Alvarez, his accent still pronounced after all these years. "Phoenix 4 standing by." Lowell, whom Harrison had believed dead since 1983. The supposedly dead squadron members, found alive after decades of silence and suffering, all showing signs of the same radiation illness that was killing Harrison, though their progressions had been slower. "Phoenix Squadron, this is Phoenix 1, Harrison replied, his voice steady despite his weakness. "You are cleared for the missing man formation. Godspeed." The jets swept over the academy in perfect formation, then executed the solemn aerial salute, one aircraft pulling up sharply into the sun, leaving a gap in the formation to represent fallen comrades. Harrison watched, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. Beside him, Westlake stood at rigid attention, rendering a perfect salute. Every cadet and officer on the ground followed suit. As the remaining aircraft made a final pass, Harrison's legs began to buckle. Rourke supported him, helping him back to the wheelchair. "Thank you," Harrison whispered, his eyes still fixed on the sky. "This is what I needed to see before I go." "You're not going anywhere, sir," Rourke said firmly. "There's still work to be done." Harrison smiled faintly. "Always is, cadet. Always is." As the jets disappeared into the distance, Harrison reached for Westlake's hand. The gesture surprised everyone present, the final healing of an old wound. "They wanted us forgotten," Harrison said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "But the truth has patience, son." In the fading sound of jet engines, Rourke thought he heard an echo of something greater, the roar of history being rewritten, of justice long delayed but finally served. Westlake turned to the assembled cadets. "Remember this day," he said. "Remember that your duty is not just to follow orders, but to know when those orders contradict your higher purpose. Remember Phoenix Squadron." Harrison's monitor alarms began to sound, medical staff rushing forward. As they wheeled him rapidly toward the waiting transport, his gaze remained fixed on the sky where his squadron had flown one last time. The truth, so long buried, had finally broken free, like the phoenix of legend rising from the ashes of deliberate obscurity. Have you ever witnessed someone finally receiving the recognition they deserved after years of being overlooked? A parent, a veteran, a mentor whose quiet sacrifice went unacknowledged? Share your story below about the unsung heroes in your life who taught you that true greatness often walks without fanfare. The medical transport sped across the academy grounds, sirens wailing as Harrison's vitals continued to destabilize. Rourke ran alongside until a medic pulled him into the vehicle. Inside, the medical team worked frantically to stabilize the elderly pilot, their faces grim with concentration. "BP dropping again," one called out. "Heart rate irregular." "He overexerted himself," the chief medical officer muttered, administering medication through an IV. "I warned him his system couldn't handle the stress." Imogen clutched her father's hand, her political composure completely abandoned. "Dad, stay with us. Please." Harrison's eyes fluttered open briefly, finding Rourke. "Worth it?" he whispered again, before slipping back into unconsciousness. At the medical facility, Harrison was rushed into intensive care. Rourke and Imogen were directed to a waiting area, where they found Westlake already pacing the floor. The former general had aged a decade in a day, his face lined with worry and regret. "Any update?" he asked immediately. Imogen shook her head. "They're doing everything they can." The three sat in uncomfortable silence, united only by their concern for Harrison. Outside, the media circus had grown. Reporters camped at the academy gates as the story of Phoenix Squadron spread across national news. What had begun as a local curiosity about an interrupted ceremony had exploded into a full government scandal, with calls for investigation echoing through Congress and the Pentagon. After an hour, the chief medical officer emerged, looking exhausted but cautiously optimistic. "He's stabilized," he reported. "His system is remarkably resilient for someone with his level of radiation damage. But I need to be clear, this is temporary. Captain Caldwell's condition is terminal. These episodes will increase in frequency and severity." "How long?" Imogen asked, her voice barely audible. "Weeks, possibly days. I'm sorry, Senator." "Can we see him?" "Briefly, he needs rest." In the ICU, Harrison lay surrounded by medical equipment, oxygen mask covering his face. Despite his condition, his eyes were alert when they entered, tracking their movements. "You frightened us, old friend," Westlake said, attempting normalcy. Harrison's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile beneath the mask. He gestured weakly for Rourke to come closer. "Sir?" Rourke leaned in. Harrison pulled the mask aside slightly. "The others," he whispered, "need to see them before time runs out." "We're arranging transport," Imogen assured him. "Nakamura and the others will be here as soon as possible." Harrison nodded, then gestured toward a small notebook on the bedside table. Rourke handed it to him, watching as Harrison's trembling hand wrote a single sentence. "Find Rivera." "Rivera?" Rourke asked. "I thought—" "They said everyone was dead," Westlake interrupted, "including Technical Officer Rivera, the electronics specialist." Harrison scribbled again. "Not on flight. Technical ground support. Might be alive." "We'll find him," Rourke promised. Harrison seemed satisfied, allowing the medical staff to replace his oxygen mask. As they left the room, Westlake pulled Rourke aside. "Find Lieutenant Freya Larson," he instructed. "She has access to classified personnel archives through her grandfather's unofficial records. If Rivera is alive, she can help locate him." Rourke nodded. "Sir, may I ask you something?" "Go ahead, Cadet." "Why did you keep the secret for so long? Even after you discovered the truth in 1991? Westlake's expression hardened. "Because I was a coward," he said simply. "I had built my career on the protocols developed after Phoenix Squadron. Revealing the truth would have meant admitting I'd risen through the ranks on a foundation of classified lies. But you could have helped them privately, arranged medical care." "I told myself they were beyond help by then," Westlake admitted. "Perhaps I even believed it. The easier path was to maintain the fiction. Every year that passed made coming forward harder." He met Rourke's gaze directly. "Remember this, Cadet Fleming. Integrity abandoned doesn't happen in a single moment of grand betrayal. It erodes slowly, one small compromise at a time." Rourke found Lieutenant Larson in the Academy archives, working late into the night. She had transformed a corner of the facility into an investigation hub, surrounded by boxes of classified documents and multiple computer terminals. "Cadet Fleming," she acknowledged, looking up from her work. "I expected you sooner. You've heard about Captain Caldwell's condition?" "I have." She gestured to the chair opposite her desk. "And I assume you're here about Technical Officer Rivera." Rourke blinked in surprise. "How did you know?" "Because it's the logical next step. Rivera was the only Phoenix Squadron member who wasn't on the flight itself. He designed the countermeasures that allowed them to penetrate Soviet air defenses." She slid a file across the desk. "According to my grandfather's records, Rivera was reassigned to a deep cover position immediately after the mission, given a new identity. He's alive? Unknown? His last known location was a research facility in Nevada, 1997. After that, the trail goes cold." She tapped the file. "But there's a protocol for emergency contact, a dead drop system that was never officially deactivated. Can we use it?" Freya's professional demeanor cracked slightly, revealing unexpected emotion. "I already did, 2 hours ago." Rourke stared at her. "Without authorization?" "This isn't about chain of command anymore, Cadet. This is about making things right." She checked her watch. "If Rivera is alive and monitoring the system, we should receive a response within 24 hours. True to her word, the response came the next morning, not through official channels, but in the form of an elderly man who appeared at the Academy gates. Like Harrison on that first day, he was unassuming, dressed in civilian clothes that gave no hint of his military background. Unlike Harrison, he came prepared, with identification that cleared security instantly. Dr. Marcus Rivera, former technical officer of Phoenix Squadron, age 78, walked into Harrison Caldwell's hospital room at precisely 1800 hours. He carried a small duffel bag and moved with the careful precision of someone long accustomed to operating undetected. "Hello, Captain," he said quietly, taking in the medical equipment in Harrison's diminished frame. "It's been a while." Harrison's eyes widened in recognition. He fumbled to remove his oxygen mask. "Rivera," he managed, voice barely audible. "You made it." "So did you, sir." Rivera set his bag on a chair. "Though it looks like we're both working against the clock." Harrison gestured weakly to Rourke, who stood by the door. "Cadet Fleming, found you." "Actually, that was Lieutenant Larson," Rourke corrected. "Sir, should I give you privacy?" "Stay," Harrison whispered. "Need to hear this." Rivera unpacked several items from his bag: a laptop, some specialized equipment Rourke didn't recognize, and a thick file folder. "I've been monitoring from afar," he explained. "When I saw the news about Phoenix Squadron, I knew it was time, but I needed confirmation through the old channels." "Where have you been?" Harrison asked. "Everywhere. Nowhere." Rivera smiled faintly. "I was given a new identity, a research position at a classified facility. When that program was shuttered in '97, I went private sector, defense contracting." "The others?" "I've kept tabs on everyone as best I could. Nakamura and Alvarez arrived last night, by the way. They're being checked by medical before they come see you." Harrison's face lit up despite his weakness. "All together again." "Almost, Captain." Rivera opened his laptop, typing rapidly. "There's something you need to see before they arrive, something I've been piecing together for decades." The door opened, and Imogen entered with Westlake. Both stopped short at the sight of Rivera. "Marcus," Westlake said, recognition and shock mingling in his voice. "General," Rivera acknowledged coolly. "Or is it civilian Westlake now? The news mentioned your resignation." "It's just Thaddeus now." Rivera nodded once, then turned back to his computer. "Senator Caldwell, I presume. Your father speaks of you often in his letters." "Letters?" Imogen looked confused. "What letters?" Harrison's eyes crinkled in a smile. "Dead drop," he whispered. "Old school." "We maintained communication," Rivera explained. "Indirectly. Through channels that couldn't be monitored. Your father may have honored his silence publicly, but he never stopped fighting privately." He turned the laptop screen toward them. "For 38 years, Harrison has been collecting evidence. Documentation of the mission, proof of the radiation exposure, records of the cover-up. I've been compiling and encrypting it, waiting for the right moment." "The congressional hearing," Imogen realized. "Exactly. You have the political position to force this into the open. I have the technical evidence to ensure it can't be buried again." Rivera looked at Harrison. "We've been playing the long game, Captain. Just like you taught us." Harrison's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Worth the wait," he managed. Rivera placed a hand on Harrison's shoulder. "The others will be here soon. Nakamura insisted on flying her own transport, by the way. Some things never change." For the first time since his collapse, Harrison laughed. A weak sound, but genuine. Later that afternoon, the reunion Rourke had been anticipating finally occurred. Maya Nakamura, former Phoenix 2, arrived first. A small Japanese-American woman with steel-gray hair and the ramrod posture of a lifelong pilot. Despite her age and her own radiation symptoms, she moved with precision and energy. "Captain," she said formally, saluting Harrison before breaking into a wide smile. "You look terrible." "You haven't changed, Maya," Harrison replied, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "Still no respect for superior officers." Rafael Alvarez followed shortly after. Phoenix 3, once Harrison's weapons officer, now a frail man with oxygen tubes but fierce eyes that missed nothing. "Captain Caldwell," he said, his accent still pronounced, "you started the party without us." Last came James Lowell, Phoenix 4, the reconnaissance specialist. His radiation symptoms were the most advanced after Harrison's, his movements slow and deliberate, but his mind remained sharp. "The band's back together," he announced, taking in the assembled squadron members. "Minus Jennings and Winters." "They didn't make it?" Rourke asked softly. "Radiation took Jennings in '95, Nakamura explained. "Winters had a heart attack in 2002. Neither lived to see justice." "They will now," Harrison said firmly. The reunion continued for hours, medics hovering anxiously but unwilling to interrupt this last gathering of Phoenix Squadron. They shared memories, filled in the gaps of decades spent apart, and, most importantly, planned for the congressional hearing that would finally bring their story to light. Rivera connected his laptop to a larger screen, displaying the extensive evidence they had accumulated. "We have enough to prove not just the mission itself, but the deliberate cover-up that followed," he explained. "The radiation exposure, the denied medical treatment, all of it." "What about the technical specifications?" Westlake asked. "Those are still classified at the highest levels." "We're not interested in exposing state secrets," Harrison clarified. "Just the truth about what we did and the price we paid for it." "The hearing is scheduled for next week," Imogen added. "We can present all of this then." Harrison's expression grew troubled. "I may not have that long." The room fell silent. Finally, Nakamura spoke up. "Then we do it now, not in some hearing room filled with politicians. Here, at the Academy, where it matters most." "How?" Westlake asked. "The hearing has official standing. This would just be—" "The truth," Rivera interrupted, "told by those who lived it. Isn't that what you promised, Harrison?" Westlake considered, then nodded slowly. "I'll make the arrangements. One final briefing from Phoenix Squadron for the historical record." 2 days later, the Academy Auditorium was transformed. Where rows of cadets had once sat for a routine ceremony, now television cameras and recording equipment stood ready to capture history. Every cadet and officer on campus had been ordered to attend, along with representatives from the Department of Defense, Congress, and the Joint Chiefs. At the center of it all was Phoenix Squadron, 5 elderly veterans whose existence had been officially denied for nearly 4 decades. Harrison sat in a wheelchair at the center, flanked by his team. Rivera had set up his evidence on large displays. Rourke, at Harrison's insistence, stood nearby. "Why me, sir?" he had asked earlier. "Because you need to witness this," Harrison had replied. "So you can tell the story when we're gone. The real story, not the sanitized version they'll try to create." As the auditorium filled, tension built. Government officials whispered urgently to each other, clearly uncomfortable with this uncontrolled disclosure. Military brass sat rigid, expressions carefully neutral. The media adjusted their equipment, sensing the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Imogen stepped to the podium first. "As chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, I called for a full investigation into Operation Broken Arrow and the events surrounding the Phoenix Squadron mission of November 1983. Today, the surviving members of that squadron will present their testimony directly in their own words, without filter or redaction." She stepped aside, and Westlake took her place. His civilian clothes still seemed strange after decades in uniform, but he stood with military bearing. 40 years ago, he began, I was the navigator on an unauthorized mission into Soviet airspace during the height of Cold War tensions. That mission prevented a nuclear exchange that would have killed millions. Upon our return, we were silenced. The mission was erased from history. Those responsible for its success were denied recognition, medical treatment, and the basic dignity of acknowledgement. He gestured to Harrison. Captain Harrison Caldwell commanded that mission. For 4 decades, he and his squadron have honored their oath of silence, even as radiation poisoning slowly killed them. Today, that silence ends. One by one, the Phoenix Squadron members told their stories. Nakamura described the stealth technology that allowed them to penetrate Soviet defenses. Alvarez recounted the tense minutes over Siberia, communicating with Soviet commanders who initially believed them to be hallucinations on their radar. Lowell detailed the evidence they gathered of the false alarm that had nearly triggered nuclear war. Rivera presented the technical documentation, explaining in terms civilians could understand how the experimental aircraft's radiation shielding had failed, exposing all crew members to lethal doses. He showed medical records, correspondence between government officials discussing the containment strategy, and the directive ordering their silence. Finally, it was Harrison's turn. Though physically diminished, his voice carried the authority of absolute conviction. "We were given a choice," he said, the microphones carrying his words clearly despite his weakness. "Silence or treason charges. We chose silence because we believed in the country we had served, even as it betrayed us. We believed that someday the truth would matter more than convenience." He looked out at the assembled cadets. I tell you this not to tarnish your faith in the institutions you serve, but to remind you of your higher duty. Sometimes the most loyal act is disobedience. Sometimes the most patriotic choice is the one that risks everything. As he spoke, the government officials in attendance grew increasingly uncomfortable. One Pentagon representative approached Imogen, whispering urgently. She listened, then walked to the podium. "I've just been informed," she announced, "that the President has signed an executive order officially recognizing the Phoenix Squadron mission and authorizing full disclosure of all related documentation. Additionally, all surviving members are to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom and full medical benefits." A murmur ran through the crowd. Harrison exchanged glances with his squadron. "Convenient timing," Nakamura muttered. "They're trying to get ahead of the story," Rivera agreed. Harrison simply nodded, unsurprised. "Politics," he said quietly. "Always the same." The ceremony continued with questions from the media and statements from military historians about the significance of the revelations. Throughout, the Phoenix Squadron members maintained their dignity, answering truthfully, but without bitterness or recrimination. As the formal proceedings concluded, cadets surged forward, surrounding the elderly heroes with questions and expressions of gratitude. Rourke watched as Harrison, despite his exhaustion, took time with each young officer in training, listening to their questions with genuine interest. "He's a natural teacher," Nakamura commented, appearing at Rourke's side. "Always was. Made him a good commander." "Did you ever resent the silence?" Rourke asked. "Being erased from history?" She considered the question carefully. "At first, absolutely. I was furious. We all were. But over time, I came to understand something. What we did mattered, whether anyone knew about it or not." She nodded toward Harrison. "He taught us that. The mission was what mattered, not the recognition." "But you deserved better," Rourke insisted. "Yes," she agreed simply. "We did. And now we have it, thanks to Harrison's patience and your generation's willingness to listen." That evening, Harrison's condition worsened again. The excitement and exertion had taken a final toll on his radiation-damaged system. As he was rushed back to the medical facility, Rourke found himself once more in the waiting room with Imogen and the Phoenix Squadron members. "This is it," Rivera said quietly. "He's known it was coming. We all have." Nakamura nodded. "He held on for this, for the truth to come out." The doctors worked through the night, but by morning their expressions told the story before they spoke. Harrison was conscious but failing rapidly. His organs were shutting down. Hours remained, perhaps minutes. "He's asking for all of you," the chief medical officer said. They gathered around Harrison's bed, his squadron, Imogen, Westlake, and Rourke. The old pilot's breathing was labored, but his eyes were clear and focused. "One last mission," he whispered. "Complete." "More than complete, Captain," Alvarez said, his own voice unsteady. "Mission accomplished beyond expectations." Harrison's gaze found Rourke. "Remember," he managed, "tell them. The truth. Always." "I will, sir," Rourke promised. Harrison nodded, satisfied. Then he looked at each of his squadron members in turn, a silent farewell. Finally, his eyes met Westlake's. "Forgiven," he said simply. Westlake couldn't speak, just nodded once, tears streaming unchecked down his face. Harrison's final words were for his daughter. "Proud of you, Emmy," he whispered. "Always was." He closed his eyes then, his breathing growing slower, shallower. The monitors tracked the weakening of his heartbeat. And then, surrounded by those who understood his sacrifice, Phoenix One completed his final flight. 3 days later, Harrison Caldwell was laid to rest with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. The ceremony, once unimaginable, was attended by the highest levels of government and military. Phoenix Squadron stood together one last time, accepting the honors that had been denied them for decades. The president himself presented the Presidential Medal of Freedom posthumously to Harrison, placing it in Imogen's hands. Similar medals were bestowed upon Nakamura, Alvarez, Lowell, and Rivera, along with posthumous awards for Jennings and Winters. As the ceremony concluded, Rourke found himself standing beside the freshly covered grave, the Academy's ceremonial unit preparing to depart. Westlake approached, now wearing a simple black suit rather than a uniform. "He would have hated all this pomp," Westlake commented, gesturing to the elaborate arrangements. But he would have appreciated the acknowledgement, Rourke replied. Yes, Westlake agreed. Not for himself, for his people. They stood in silence for a moment before Westlake spoke again. The Academy is establishing a new curriculum module on ethical leadership, centered on the Phoenix Squadron mission. They've asked me to help develop it. Will you? I declined, Westlake said, and recommended you instead. Me? Rourke was stunned. I'm just a cadet. You're the one Harrison chose to carry the story forward. He saw something in you, Fleming, something worth trusting. Before Rourke could respond, Nakamura joined them. The memorial is approved, she announced. Full funding. Construction begins next month. What memorial? Rourke asked. The blank wall at the Academy, she explained. It won't be blank anymore. All 7 names will be there, along with the truth about the mission. Harrison would have liked that, Westlake said softly. There's more, Nakamura continued. They're renaming the Advanced Flight Training Center after him, the Harrison Caldwell Center for Aviation Excellence. Westlake smiled sadly. Now that, he would have hated. Completely, Nakamura agreed with a chuckle. He'd have grumbled about it for days. 1 year later, Rourke Fleming stood at the newly dedicated Phoenix Squadron Memorial Wall. No longer blank stone, it now bore 7 names, the details of their mission, and a simple inscription. Sometimes courage means knowing when not to follow orders. As the Academy's newest instructor, Lieutenant Fleming had accepted a position teaching ethics and leadership immediately after graduation. He had brought his first class to see the memorial. The cadets examined it with appropriate respect, asking thoughtful questions about the mission and its aftermath. Lieutenant Fleming, one cadet asked, did you know Captain Caldwell well? Briefly, Rourke admitted, but long enough to learn what really matters in this uniform. As his class continued their tour, Rourke noticed a woman standing nearby, Senator Imogen Caldwell, watching the cadets with interest. Senator, he greeted her, I didn't know you were visiting today. Just passing through, she said. The committee investigation concluded yesterday. All Phoenix pilots receiving full posthumous recognition and benefits for their families. That's excellent news. My father would have been pleased, she said, gazing at the memorial, though he might argue it came 40 years too late. Better late than never, Rourke suggested. Is it? Imogen questioned. The last one, Nakamura, passed last month. None of them lived to see the full accounting. Rourke absorbed this with sadness. In just 1 year, the remaining members of Phoenix Squadron had succumbed to their radiation injuries, one by one. I'm sorry to hear that. They knew it was coming, Imogen said. My father never wanted glory, you know. Just acknowledgement that they existed, that what they did mattered. They stood in companionable silence, watching as a new group of cadets approached the memorial. These young officers in training studied the names with curiosity and respect. Rourke approached them. Do you know the story of Phoenix Squadron? One cadet stepped forward eagerly. Yes, sir. They flew into enemy territory against orders because it was right. Commander Caldwell said, sometimes the bravest thing isn't following orders. It's knowing when not to. Rourke smiled, nodding in satisfaction. And that's the most important lesson any of us can learn while wearing this uniform. As he rejoined Imogen, she handed him a small package. This was my father's. He wanted you to have it. Inside was Harrison's pilot wings, worn and tarnished from decades of storage. I can't accept this, Rourke protested. It should stay with your family. You are his legacy now, Imogen said simply. Those cadets, this memorial, the true story finally being told, that's what he wanted, not a symbol in a drawer. Rourke closed his hand around the wings, feeling their weight, not just metal, but the responsibility they represented. Thank you. As Imogen departed, Rourke remained at the memorial wall, watching the flow of cadets and officers paying their respects. The story of Phoenix Squadron had become part of the curriculum, studied and analyzed by each new class. Not as a tale of disobedience, but as an example of moral courage in the face of impossible choices. In the distance, the sound of jet engines drew his attention skyward. A training flight passed overhead, their formation perfect against the blue. For a moment, Rourke imagined a different aircraft, experimental, secret, piloted by 7 brave souls who chose to risk everything for a mission that officially never happened. The blank wall had finally found its purpose, the empty space filled with truth, names restored to history, recognition, at last, for those who never asked for glory, only acknowledgement that they existed, that what they did mattered. As the sun set over Holloway Air Force Academy, casting long shadows across the grounds where generations of pilots had trained, Lieutenant Rourke Fleming touched the wings in his pocket and made a silent promise to the man who had trusted him with the truth. Some stories deserve to be remembered, even when systems try to bury them. Some acts of courage transcend orders and regulations. Some heroes never seek recognition but deserve it more than any others. The truth has patience, even when we don't. Who in your life embodied quiet courage, doing what was right when it would have been easier to follow the crowd? Share their story below, so their example can inspire others, as Phoenix Squadron has inspired a new generation of leaders who understand that true integrity sometimes means standing alone.